All right. So we are back. My name is Brendan Dowdy, and I'm going to call this my little conversation forum. Today we are going to speak with my mother. Um, known me for 37 years now, and has done a great job raising a tall young gentleman. And we're going to see what she has to say about a few things that's going on in her life, and we will have a little discussion. Let's start at the top. Hey, Mom, how are you?
Hi, Brandon. How are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Out here making money, living life, doing the things I need to do.
Wonderful.
All right, so I brought you on here to uh, just impart a few things on your life that actually have impacted you and done wonders in your life to ensure that you can provide a great life for me and the family that you have created. So I wanted to talk to you about relationships and how you and dad operate and all those things, but I think you had a different take and had a different idea on what you wanted to do. So let's dive in deep into that. I think you wanted to talk about your experience leaving where you were from in Chase City, Virginia, to coming to Maryland. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay, so tell me a little bit about that. Where did it all start?
Well, one of the things that I thought of when we first had this conversation was things that were life-changing events in my life.
Mm-hmm.
When did I decide that things needed to change in my life? What I grew up around was a Southern upbringing in Southern Virginia. My hometown is 2 hours past Richmond, about 40 miles from the North Carolina line. And in that area, it's farmland.
Mm-hmm.
People grow different kinds of crop, tobacco, corn, wheat, hay, all those kinds of crops. And it's a labor-driven area. And that's how we grew up. That was our means of survival
Mm-hmm.
in the country. And one of the things that put me on I have to make a change in my life was the way that we grew up. I left high school in 1971.
Mm-hmm.
The work that we did was hard, intense labor, working on the back of a tractor, putting tobacco plants into the ground, using a hoe to chop grass out of the tobacco when it was growing up to a certain size. Grass would also grow, and if you didn't take the grass out, then the tobacco would be stifled. And it was done in hot sun. We had irrigation pipes that had to be set out into a field of newly planted tobacco to make sure that it got enough water, because there was no other way for it to grow in dry, hard ground, but to put irrigation pipes out. And it was hard work. It was work that you thought men would be doing, but I was out there with my brothers doing the same work that they were doing. And it was hard work.
How old were you when this was going on?
From the time I was about 6 years old. When I was 6 years old, the farm that we worked on had a house for the family, the host family, meaning the people who were going to do the actual work. And usually that was a Black family. And then there was a family, the white family, who lived on the same farm. And we worked in conjunction with them to raise a crop of 10 to 15 acres of tobacco. Mm-hmm. I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. So there's 7 kids. And at that time, I was 6 years old. And this work started at 7:00 in the morning, and wet, cold weather. And my mother stood me on a 5-gallon bucket, put a trash bag around me to keep me from getting wet from the tobacco. And I stood there all day handing 3 to 4 to 5 leaves to my mother, and she would string them on a stick that then would go into a barn. And the barn was like a log cabin. and it would had burners, and the burners would cure the tobacco, so that then after some time, that tobacco then would come out and go into a bundle or a bale, and then taken to a warehouse, and the warehouse then would sell it according to the quality of that tobacco. And
Wow,
that's how we made money. That was part of what we did.
that's a lot. So, question, because I have you said something I want to talk about, and then just a quick question: how big are these leaves? Because when you think about leaves,
Well,
most
the
people aren't
leaves,
most people aren't um, thinking big, huge leaves. They're thinking about the leaves you get off of trees.
no, these leaves would be about this long, mostly that long, and that wide.
So that
So
means
I would say about 20 inches long and about 15 inches wide. And where I was is where the process was the second step of the process. My brothers and my father were in the actual field where the tobacco was being pulled from the bottom of the plant. And they would pull the tobacco off the bottom leaves. And when they got a handful, then they would stick it under their arm like this. They would take it and they would stick it under their arm like this. And then when that arm got full underneath their arm, they would take it over to a slide. And the slide was a wooden slide with burlap on either side. It would be probably the length of a car, pulled by a tractor or pulled by a mule. And as their arm got full, as much they could put there, then they would go to the slide and they would keep it as close to them as they could. And they'd be pulling from each side of the row. They would go down a row and they'd pull from this side of the row and they'd pull from that side of the row. And then they would walk up. Once that arm got full, they would take it over to the slide and put it in the slide. They'd go back to their row and there would be one person in this row with two rows, one on each side, one on the left side, one on the right side. They'd go to the next, there'll be another man in the next row, man or boy, and you would look at the leaves and see how they had changed from bright green to a yellowing. The yellowing means that it was ripe. Like you would say, an apple was green when it started on the tree, and now it's turning yellowish. That means now it's ripe and ready to be harvested. And that's the first step. But the work was grueling and hard. And
very
then at the end of the year, when it was time for selling the tobacco, you would, after it had been cured in the barn, then you'd put it in a pack house. The pack house was a big open barn, and you would put all this tobacco there. Mm-hmm. And then you would look at when you pull it off the sticks, because it was sewn onto a stick. Mm-hmm. And when you would pull it off, take it out to put it in bundles, because you had to put it in a round bundle. You would lay it with the ends and the leaf. You would put it into a fashion like this. You would put it into a fashion like stem to stem, all the way around on a burlap sack, and you would tie that burlap sack up, and then they would take it to market. Right. They would put 200 or 300 pounds on each blanket, on each burlap sack to take it to market. And then buyers would come on a specific day that they had a sale day for that warehouse, and they would grade it. Buyers would go and they would look at all of the tobacco leaves that were there. All the different farms would bring their tobacco to this warehouse on a specific day of the week, and they would grade it to say, this is good quality and we can use it for cigars, or we can use it for cigarettes, or we could use it for this or that. And then that was the process. Once they did the grading, and then they would say how many pounds this person had, because when the tobacco was taken in these burlap sacks, they were as big as 2 tractor tires. And they would take it so that it was weighed and graded, and it would be paid for. The farmer would be paid by the quality of what was in that burlap sack.
Wow. That sounds very labor intensive and very tiring just to think about. But
Absolutely.
so from there, I know that you did that for quite a while because you said you were only 6. How long did you do that until you were like, all right, time for change?
The year of when I was a senior in high school, I knew that would be the last time that I would be doing this kind of work unless I was doing it as a means of getting cash for myself to buy personal things for myself. I would work for someone else. When I worked for our family farm, it wasn't our farm, the farm that we worked on, that was our parents would get a certain amount of money at the end of the year when they would settle up with the person who was the foreman of the farm, and they would settle up, and we might get $20.
Wow, for a year's worth of work?
Yes, $20. If we got $20 each time, they would have a batch of tobacco that would go to the market to be sold. We might get $20.
Okay, so but I understand $20, but let's rationalize that a little bit more because $20 in what year is a different thing. Because yeah, it probably is a lot of money back then, but still not a lot.
Well, it was a lot because at this time, before I graduated from high school, you could go to the store and a loaf of bread might be 15 cents.
Got it.
A popsicle might be 5 cents, 3 cents. It's a different kind. You might get a Nutty Buddy for 5 cents. Okay. You could get, my uncle will come to our house with a bag of candy, and he paid probably $3. But that 20-pound bag, like the lunch bags that we have, the paper lunch bag, that bag would be full of candy because there were 6 or 7 of us at most points in our life as we were growing up as kids. Wow. And so the one thing that life-changing event for me was when I got out of high school, I knew I wasn't doing that work anymore. I knew it was going to be something else. After I graduated from high school, I graduated on a Friday, and on Tuesday, I had a job at a Russell Stover candy factory.
Oh, okay.
My mother worked there for 35 plus years, right. But she told her boss that her daughter was graduating high school, and if there was any work or job that she could be hired for. And she said, yes, have her come over, go to the human resources and sign up, and we'll find a place for her to work. And so I went over a couple of weeks before I graduated from high school. I went into the human resources, did all the paperwork, and I graduated on Friday. And on Tuesday, I was working at the Russell Stover Candy Factory.
That's crazy because no one usually gets a job that quickly outside of school unless they have done something, or I mean, that nowadays at least.
That's a recommendation. My mother was a good worker. My mother had worked there probably 5 years before I graduated high school. And so they knew her work ethic, and they figured I would be the same work ethic. And they were right. I was put in a position to work as a service person. And the one good thing about this job, every 3 months we got a salary increase. Oh. The initial salary would probably have been minimum wage at that time. But every 3 months, because the longer you stayed, the more they depended on you and the more they got to know that you were valuable for the company. And we would, every 3 months for the entire 2.5 years I worked there, we got a raise.
So you only worked there for 2 years?
I worked there for 2 years. And in that 2 years, I saw the money that I was making, and it was valuable to me because it was much more than I was getting when we were doing the farm work. Mm-hmm. but I didn't see myself progressing in that because, again, it was inside work, labor intensive work. There were ladies that worked there. They put the decorations or the designs on candies, which means they dip the candy by hand in chocolate. They would put the design on it as they put it on a tray, and it was very labor intensive. And you had to have a perfect tray of candy of 70 pieces on a tray. And I was serving them whatever they needed. If there was candy they needed, if there were trays that the candy would, the paper that you put the candy on for it to dry. And so that was another labor intensive job. Okay. And after about a year of doing the labor work, I decided that I needed to try to see if I could do the candy, hand dipping the candy and putting it on the trays. And I tried that, and I could make money doing it if I was fast enough to do a certain amount of trays per day. I think I did that for about 5 months before I said to myself, the money's good. And I was actually doing a lot of things with the money. I bought my first car. I saved $200 of the money that I made at the factory. And I bought I guess it was about a 1962 Ford Fairlane sporty car, put the insurance on it, paid for the car, paid the $200 outright. And so that's how I bought that car in 1971. I paid $200.
That's crazy. $200 for a car is unheard of, unthinkable.
Yes, but the car was in very good shape. It was a Ford, and I wouldn't buy a Ford now, but the car was in very good shape. It looked as if it were brand new inside. It wasn't beat up. It wasn't, because you have to understand that most of the people who were buying cars at that time were white.
Yeah.
And they kept it nice enough that they could take it back and trade it. They didn't trash the car. So it was in really good shape.
How old was the car when you bought it? Like,
it was 1962, and this was now 1971. I graduated from high school in 1971. And before the first year of working at that factory, because I started in June, because we graduated in June, and before 6 months, I had enough money to buy the car and insure it. When I purchased it from the dealer, all of the registration and tags and all of that were included in the price of the $200.
What? That's just a different perspective on having to pay for car insurance.
Right. Well, the registration, it was just a registration, and I had to then purchase the insurance, but the insurance was like maybe $100.
That's actually not bad.
Right, but we're talking about a very rural town. We had one stoplight in that town and one caution light by the time I was in 1971 when I graduated from high school. Yeah. And eventually the second caution light turned into a stoplight. But it was a very rural, small town. I think the capacity maybe 6,000 people, if it's 6,000 people. And that's the inner city, the city within the city limits, and the outskirts of the town where people lived on farms, some lived on farms, and some lived in the city. So it was fairly small.
Yeah. So, okay, you got out of high school, you've done Russell Stover's, and you are starting to see that this is not what you wanted to do. What is the next step for you? Because clearly you're not still there.
No, I decided to go back to school. Right. There's a community college, Southside Virginia Community College, 22 miles from where we live. I had a car, and it was a program for clerical studies, which meant if I can complete this course, And it was a 1-year course. And I ended up, it was like 2 semesters. So I did 2 semesters and then a third semester to finish, and graduated with the clerical studies. And it was a certificate. It was not a diploma. It was a certificate.
Okay.
And once I got that certificate, but I basically worked for about 3 weeks and worked at Russell Stover. And I also applied for FAFSA, which is the Federal Student Loan Program.
Y'all know FAFSA.
And I got enough money because I then decided that the car I had needed to be upgraded if I was going to be driving it back and forth every day to Keysville. So I got a different car. Now I have a car payment. I couldn't pay for this next car outright like I did the first one. And so when I filled out my FAFSA form, I included money for entertainment, for car insurance, my car payment, and my books and my tuition. All of that was included.
Right.
I was there for 1 full year and 1 semester to graduate. And when it was time to pay any of that money back, I ended up paying $300 back to the government.
That's it.
That's it. And if
this FAFSA, I don't know this FAFSA at all.
But one of the things that on the application, it asks you questions. So it kind of evaluates you. Mm-hmm. I'm living at home with my parents. I haven't moved out, and I just graduated from high school. I have 6 other siblings all living in the same house. So 6 other siblings living in the same house. I got plenty of money from the FAFSA. I was able to, after 3 weeks, figuring out I can't work and do my homework and be successful, I gave a notice and left the job.
Okay, that makes sense.
My father said to me, because one of the things after we graduated high school and got a job, one of the things that was required of us at home was that we would have to pay my mother money to help defer the expenses of an adult still living at the house. Yeah. So I can't remember us giving mom more than $20 of our paycheck per week when we got paid, because we got paid weekly. It wasn't just 2 weeks, not waiting for a check for 2 weeks. It was weekly, you got a paycheck. And every week I would give my mother $20 of my paycheck. And that was my paying my way. Like I was a renter now. I was an adult now. And that's exactly how I felt. I was an adult. Don't ever tell me what I can and cannot do anymore just because I live in your house.
Listen,
I'm paying my way.
And that makes so much sense now, because I know where that energy comes from and where it went. It's here. It's all over here.
Absolutely. So it was I enjoyed what I was doing as far as going to school. I had free time. I got my homework done. The only class that I had a problem with was typing. Oh. My fingers just didn't know typing.
Yeah.
And I could type a letter. I could type paragraphs, but to say I could do 40 or 50 words per minute, which is what some jobs required of you, I never reached that. And I ended up having to take the typing class twice, which wasn't a huge thing. It was just that I needed to pass it.
Right. Well, that's funny, but I'm thinking now, and everything you're saying, I'm thinking about it in the sense of where we are now, and then trying to remember, no, that's not how things were now. You are using a typewriter, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. It was a typewriter. It was not a keyboard like the computers we have now. It was not. It was a typewriter. And you made a mistake. It was a mistake because you then had to get whiteout to correct that mistake. Yep. If you typed 50 words and had 40 mistakes, you were not going to
throw the whole page away.
You have to throw the whole page away.
Yeah.
And then at some point in my life, I decided that working at the Russell Stover Candy, that was a good step going to school, getting the certificate for clerical studies, because we took economics, math, we took every class that you would take if you were in a regular college program, all of the basics. And I was successful in 1975. I graduated and I started looking for jobs in Richmond. I would go to Richmond, now this is something you want to hear about, employment agencies, workforce development situations. So you would be able to go to these places and they would help you find jobs, and they would send you to places where you could put yourself in a position to find a job. Okay. And I made probably 4 or 5 trips to Richmond, never got an appointment for more than 2 jobs. So I decided, I had a friend who had a sister that lived in New York, and now I'm flush with money. I put my money in savings, and so I didn't do a lot of spending. I didn't do a lot of entertainment because there really wasn't a lot of places that you could go there on the weekends. I think the most exciting place that we would go 22 miles to South Boston, and there was a McDonald's. We would stroll, and when I say stroll, we drive around the McDonald's, see who was there, see if there was anybody interested, and everybody in that area did the same thing. So that was a meeting place. We'd also go to the Pizza Hut restaurant on the weekend. My brother sit down in the restaurant and eat. Yep. Now, this was one of the big things, sitting in a restaurant and eating, sitting at McDonald's and eating, because from the time I can remember when I was in elementary school, there was no place for Black people to go and sit down and eat. I didn't know anything about that until after I had graduated high school. Part of my upbringing was going through, seeing our people down south who were doing the sit-ins in the restaurants, trying to get equity for Black people. Was we would see on TV where people would be hit with water hose, and they would be sicking police dogs on people. So to have a place where we could go and sit down in the restaurant and have a meal, or go into McDonald's or Pizza Hut and have a meal, was all new to us. Even though we didn't have conflict with white people there, the air of superiority on their part was still there. Right. And to say that we were taught that in my parents' house, to say that we were taught that civil rights was going on, we were not. Mm-hmm. My parents would take us downtown on a Saturday morning after everybody got dressed and taken their bath and everybody's hair is done. They'd take us downtown, and we had a few dollars. We would go to the movies. And the one thing I can remember so vividly, we could go to the movies, but we would go into the front door, buy our tickets, buy our snacks, popcorn, sodas, or whatever, candy, whatever we wanted. Then we would go back out the front door, go around to the side of the building, go up these narrow little steps to a balcony where Black people sat. This was before I got out of high school. We could not sit in the same space where white people sat. But of course, we threw popcorn on them and we threw sodas on them, accidentally dropped sodas down.
Accidentally?
But accidentally, really accidentally. But it was just our little protest.
Right. I get it.
But after I finished the program at Southside and went to Richmond trying to find jobs, I decided that I would go for a visit to New York with my girlfriend, Virgie Bacon. And we stayed for 2 weeks. Okay. I went out looking for jobs. She went out looking for jobs. She found a job. I found nothing. She had also taken a program, which was a 2-year program at the same school, because that's where we met, at Southside Virginia Community College in Keysville, Virginia. Both of us graduated actually the same time. And so we remained friends for years and years and years. She ended up working for an insurance company. Mm-hmm. I came back home after 3 weeks and decided I was going to move to Washington, D.C. And I had a cousin who lived in Washington, D.C. I went up to visit her for a weekend, called her, and wrote to her. I'm sure I wrote to her.
Yeah.
Because I don't think I had a phone number for her. And I went up, spent the weekend, and I was hooked. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I went up in the summer. It was very nice. And I ended up moving to Washington in the winter, February. And to say the temperature in the winter in Washington, D.C. was the same as the winter and temperature in Chase City, Virginia, there was no comparison. I had a car and I didn't know how to get around, so I needed to learn how to get to work, because I got a job as 2 weeks after I was in Washington. I went to agencies, I got the newspaper, I got the yellow pages, and I looked for every agency. And I was able to get around on buses. And my cousin could tell me which bus, where to turn, and when you get on the bus, if you don't know where to get off, the drivers are very good. They will tell you, if you're going to this address, you need to get off, and then you need to go over to that street, and you get on that bus, and tell you the number of the bus. And I could get around very well on the bus. And I went to the agency. The agency sent me to an interview. I interviewed, they hired me. And I was set. I was hired for an insurance company called Victor O. Schinnerer, which was an insurance company for engineers and architects. And I was hired to work in the mailroom. This company was on Wisconsin Avenue, 5028. I remember the address, Wisconsin Avenue. I worked there for 8 years. I started working there in February of 1976. And I worked for almost a year as a mail clerk. With that job, I was going to the post office, going to the airport. I was doing any of the errands that the company needed, picking up tickets for people who were traveling from our travel agent in Bethesda, Maryland. I would go to the post office, which was on Wisconsin Avenue, probably 2 miles from the office. I would go to pick up someone from the airport. And I learned the city, which was the best thing, the best job I could have ever had. Wow. I learned the city.
Okay, so hold on 1 second. Hold on. We gotta take a little break, and we'll come right back, and we'll catch back up with you being in DC and your new jobs and being an insurance. We were in the mailroom. The last we spoke, you were saying that you were a tobacco farmer. You worked at Russell Stover's, went to college. Well, got your certificate program at a community college, and now you're in Washington, D.C. What happens next?
Well, we talked about the first job I got 2 weeks after I moved to Washington, D.C. I went through the phone book, I went through the paper, and I found employment agencies. I went to the agencies, and at that time, agencies would find you a job and you didn't have to pay a fee.
Okay.
And I went to the interview. I hope I interviewed well, but I got the job the same day and went through the process of all the things that needed to happen for me to become employed there.
Okay.
The insurance company was Victor O. Schinnerer Insurance. Mm-hmm. And I worked as initially a mail room clerk, which meant I picked up the mail, distributed to all of the staff throughout the building. We separated everything. put everything into where they needed to be, delivered it to each floor. We had 4 floors in the building on 5028 Wisconsin Avenue. And I worked there as the person who would go pick up tickets in our travel agent in Bethesda, Maryland. I would go to the airport. I was all over the city, and that's how I learned how to get around in the city. I moved to Washington with a car, but I didn't know how to get around. And you could easily get lost in a maze of the streets, because even though the streets go from A to Z, you could still get lost if you didn't recognize some space. At that time, there was no GPS to tell you, make a right turn here and a left turn there. And so you just had to learn the city.
Right.
I worked at the insurance company for engineers and architects. Mm-hmm. And I went from the mailroom after about 8 or 9 months. A position came available as a claims adjuster.
Okay.
As a claims secretary is what they call the position. And I would type up the claims whenever there is a loss where a building was built by one of our clients who was insured, and we would have to pull the file. I pulled the file, made a report on this form, and I used a typewriter to type up the claim. And there was no computer at that time where you could just type it into the computer and type the information in and just zoom it to someone. There was no zooming it to anybody. It was just a paper process. Yep. I worked in that position. I worked at the company from 1976 to 1980, but I worked in two different positions within the company and was temporary in the third position. I was a mailroom clerk. I moved from that department to the claims department. I worked as a claim department. In the claims department, there was a warranty program, a home warranty program. And if a person who was insured had a claim for their home where a water pipe broke or there was some kind of damage to their home or their roof, I would have to put those claims through to an adjuster. The adjuster would go out to the family, make a determination, and I would make sure that the contractors got paid. Wow. And so I did that while one of our employees was on maternity leave. I had the opportunity at this company to become an insurance adjuster, which means a new company wants to get insured. I would be the one who would do the underwriting process. Mm-hmm. And I waited and waited. I asked the manager if he needed someone, if there was a position, and he said yes. And as soon as you can get human resources to transfer you, we'll make the change. Mm-hmm. And my boss had the knowledge of this and would not give me the information or give HR the information to transfer me. And I checked with him and asked him, when was it going to happen? He says, why am I going to make someone else's department work smooth and make my department not run smoothly? And within 2 weeks, I had found a new job and I gave a 2-week notice. They paid me for the 2 weeks and told me I could go the next day. Wow. And I started a new job at a medical practice on 19th Street, DC, with 4 doctors. They had 6 nurses. They had their own lab. They did a basic metabolic test. And then they sent a lot of their tests out to other larger labs. Right. And I worked there from 1980 to 1987. In 1987, I was on maternity leave because I had a little boy named Brandon. And I worked there. But while I was on maternity leave, I found out that the file clerk, who was a GW student, who came over in the afternoons after he got off work and filed charts and pulled charts for next day's patient, they had made the file clerk the office manager. So I started looking for a job while I was on maternity leave. And by the time I came back in March of 87 or 88, I found out that I had a new job.
How long had you been there before you?
I started in 1980, and I worked up until March of 88. 88 because
So,
my was born in 87, and I worked until 88 when I went back to work. I told I had a job when I went to say, well, I'll be back on Monday. I came back on Monday and I stayed for 2 weeks, but I wanted to make sure I got my pay, because if I don't get my pay, then I'm like, okay, the maternity leave pay was the same as when I was working. So, and that normally doesn't happen.
right.
You get your reduced pay because you're on disability. I got my full pay for the 3 months I was on maternity leave. That's how that job was. It was just a really good job, but they made some weird decisions.
Really
And
bonehead decisions.
yeah, so it happens, and you just have to make the decision which is best for you. But at that time, jobs were very plentiful, especially in medical. And when I got into medical, I did not have a problem getting other jobs. Even when I was um, at Children's Hospital, I went there after I left the doctor's practice because I wasn't going to come back and train the file clerk to be my boss.
Right.
And he knew I had to train him on the computers because he didn't know how to use the computers, because all he did was pull files and file files, and that was it. That's
You,
all he knew.
oh, you had been there 7, 8 years, and you're gonna.
I'd been there 8 years. I'd been there from 1980, and I was there in this 1988, and they were going to come in and make the file clerk. And I don't know if they thought I would or wouldn't leave, and they probably didn't care. I came back one day to visit, and they wanted me out of the office like I was a plague.
Wow. And that's
Yeah,
probably because they didn't want you to know how well or how bad the office was running because you weren't there anymore.
well, I've had a couple of jobs. When I left the job, they had two people, because now what they were asking me to do, they needed two people.
Wow.
So and it's not something that you think is so great. It's just that they pile so much work on you because they see you can do the work and nothing falls through the cracks.
Mm-hmm.
They just say, well, can you do this? And you're like, do I say no? What happens if I say no?
Right.
Then my evaluation comes up and they say, well, you're not willing to work and do this. And then that's a
mark on your character.
Mark on your record, and they don't want to give you higher ratings. So you just kind of say yes, because at one point we were transitioning from writing everything on a paper, on a form, to transitioning to everybody having a computer at their desk. And they wanted to put new software on old computers, and the computers could not support the new software. And so I'm going desk to desk as if I'm a computer technician to say it's not working because the computer and the software and the hardware don't match. And so, but they don't think about it in that way, because physicians know what physicians are supposed to know. They don't know what technical people know, like the computer system is not working and it's not doing what it's supposed to do because the hardware and software are not talking to each other. But after Children's Hospital, I had, during my 11 years at Children's Hospital, I worked in the neurosurgery department and I worked in the plastic surgery department at the same time. I was a manager over about 8 people, and we had a nurse and nurse practitioners. And it was a great place to work. It had all the amenities. I mean, they had all kinds of celebrities coming through, because kids who were in the hospital for long stays, they would bring them down to the atrium of the hospital, and all kinds of Ringling Brothers would come. The Globetrotters would come and entertain the kids. Whenever they had a play in town, whoever was in the area would come and visit at Children's Hospital and go around and see the kids and put on a performance. So that was a great job.
Now you're saying you worked as in HR? Because I'm going to assume what you did in HR then is probably very different from what they do now.
I didn't work in human resources. I worked in medical offices I was the manager over the staff that was the administrative assistant, people who answered the phone, people who made appointments, people who were there to pull the charts and make sure that the doctors had a clinic set up to run to see patients. And we saw patients almost every day. The doctors had Monday, Wednesday afternoons where they would do surgeries, or they do surgeries early in the morning, but they also had 2 or 3 days where they saw patients all day, patients for coming back after a surgery, patients who had new conditions that were referred to Children's Hospital, people from coming out of town, and people coming from out of the country. We had a lot of patients from Saudi Arabia, and their families were rich in Saudi Arabia, so they had money to send their kids here for long stays, especially with something like a brain tumor, a spinal cord injury, or any of those kinds of things that would be taken care of at Children's Hospital. I worked at Children's Hospital for 11 years. I worked in several different departments, even when I was at the point where I was working as a office manager. They decided they wanted to make a change, and they said, "We don't need you here anymore. Your job will end in 30 days. And I went down to human resources and applied for other jobs, applied for the job that they were replacing me with. They wanted to replace, and I applied for that job. Of course, they had already decided before I found out anything about it. They decided that they didn't want me there anymore, but that was okay. And I ended up working in the business office. And that was the best time I've ever had, because it's just basically making calls, finding out why people hadn't paid their bills, and telling them what they needed to do, going back to the insurance company to get the payments. And it was an easy day. It was not the stress. It was probably the best time I had at Children's, because it was not the stress of everyday meetings and the talking with the doctors and talking with several different departments, making sure that the employees were doing what they needed to do or what they were supposed to do. Just everything on your shoulders.
Yeah.
So it was
the head of the department versus someone a part of like a cog in the machine.
Yes, it was nice. And I was away from the hospital complex because the business office was in Silver Spring and the hospital was on Michigan Avenue in DC. So I didn't have to go into DC. I could go to Silver Spring, and I did that for about 9 months. And it was nice. I enjoyed it. It was a nice rest. I could go out for lunch and not worry about running back in. If it was an hour lunch or an hour and a half lunch, I was right in Silver Spring. I was right there at Colesville Road and Georgia Avenue, which is the heart of Silver Spring. The shopping mall was there, the movie theater was there, and you could go out and have lunch at any of 20 different places. So it was a nice setup there. But then a position came up, and a manager called me to tell me that the position was available, and I went down and applied for it. And we had to do a little salary dance. They wanted to pay me a lot less than they were paying the person who was in the position, who wasn't doing any of the technical work with the bills and the budgets. She wasn't doing any of that work. She was just doing little projects for the physicians. And she was being transferred to another city with her husband, who was military. Yeah. But that was a good job also. Wow. I've had probably twice that I've been home from a job being laid off, and laid off for about 6 months with one job. Then I was laid off about a year with another job. They make a change and you just have to move.
Yeah, that's crazy. And that's the idea of changing jobs is always daunting to anyone. So losing your job and just not having anything is kind of, I know that life.
Right.
I know that life very well. So I got a question. When it comes to transitioning from one job to another while you have 2 kids, how did that work?
Well, the first thing you think about when you're transitioning in a job is that I have bills to pay, and I have things that I want to hold on to. I don't want things that I do have to be taken away from me. And so, and if it's two people, like when I was off from work, Jim had a full-time job working with the federal government. So we weren't starving. We weren't in a financial bind. But you have to think about the burden you put on the other person. Right. And it is a burden to say, okay, there's a bill coming up and we can't pay it. Early on in Jim and I, when we were early on in our marriage, Jim, when we got married, didn't have a job, but he had a mindset of what he could do. And he started a home improvement business. And in that home improvement business, it was, you're always using the money from a current job to support another job. And so it was a cycle of making sure you have enough money. If you don't have a lot of seed money or you don't have a lot of savings, you have to use some of your household money to buy the things that you need to complete a job to get paid for it. Now, he did a lot of things, like he learned how to install doors, exterior doors, interior doors, and someone taught him the whole realm of how to do that. He was shadowing a person who had been doing it for 30 plus years. But he'd go to the hardware store to pick up an item or a tool, and while he's in the store, somebody breaks in and steals his tools. Wow. That happens twice. And my thing is, if that happens, it puts you back. It puts you back. It puts you back. And he finally got to the point, he said that if he could find a government position, he would do a government position. And he went to a job fair, met people there at the job fair that saw him, liked him, and said, we're going to hire you. And within a very short period of time, he was hired in the federal government and worked there for 35 years. So it was make the decision that you're going to continue to do what you need to do to make sure that your family's taken care of. And he did that. And I was all in. I had a full-time job the whole time, from the time I met Jim in 87, early part of the year. And I had a full-time job working at the doctor's office. I changed jobs to Children's Hospital because I worked with Washington Internal Medicine when I met him. I changed jobs to Children's Hospital. I was there for 11 years. So financially, I was making a really good salary. And I was all in financially with I didn't hold back anything. Mm-hmm. If we needed money, I would give him the check and he was paying the bills. I would take what I needed to get back and forth to work, buy groceries, and everything else I gave to him so that we could survive and pay our bills. And that reward came back to me as a part of, now at 62, I was able to not go back to work. Right. He was working in a position at Security and Exchange, good government job, that I did not have to go to work.
In those moments before you left, when you were like 22 years old, what was the thing that pushed you to make that jump from Washington, from Chase City, Virginia to Washington, D.C.?
I don't think I've ever told anybody this. When I was working, I was busy working. Mm-hmm. On the weekends, I would do activities. On Sunday night, when I knew I had to go back to work on Monday, I was so depressed. Mm-hmm. It was beyond depressed that I knew I wanted a change.
Got it.
That was one of the reasons I went to New York with my friend, because I could have ended up in New York. Mm-hmm. I came back home after being there for 3 weeks, and I decided that let me try going to DC, because there's somebody there that I know that will allow me to move until I was able to get a job.
Right.
That was the agreement.
Okay. And I can relate to that because that's kind of how I got to where I am. If you don't know, I'm in California. My mom's in Maryland, and I had a very similar situation with a family friend of my father, her husband, and I was able to stay with them. And I said this in a previous video. I was able to stay with her for about 6 months to get my feet under me and really decide to uh, get on a high horse and figure out what I need to do to get into production because that was my ultimate goal. So I definitely understand where you're coming from. I had those moments of fear and anxiety about moving, but I had to do it because if I didn't, I felt I would be spinning wheels in Maryland and wanting to be out, but not knowing what to do or how to do it. And I had to do it before any kid, any girlfriend, anything else. I had a lot of people be upset because I decided to leave in such a quick manner. People were like really upset with me. Like there are people that you know that are upset with me that don't talk to me anymore because I left so quickly. It's like I had to do what I had to do, and for you to take it and feel like I abandoned you in some form of fashion, it is what it is. I have to do what I have to do.
Right. And you do. It's like when you wake up, that's the first thing in your mind. And I think that one of the things that I thought about after I moved, and it didn't dawn on me before I moved, my parents went into a depression when I moved because one of the things I did when I was working, I spent money that my parents really should have been spending. We had secondhand furniture. I went and bought a new living room furniture, threw that old crap away because I wanted it to look nice. I went to Sears. I bought laminate floor covering, which was for the kitchen, living room, dining room, kitchen, bathroom. I bought enough of that laminate flooring and put it down myself. I don't even remember how I did it, but I moved the furniture out to the front porch and got everything out and put down that laminate floor. I bought bunk beds for the bedrooms because the house that we were in had full-size beds. Mm-hmm. I went and bought bunk beds for both bedrooms. We had a bedroom for the girls and a bedroom for the boys. And I went and bought bunk beds for one room. After I finished paying for that, I went and bought bunk beds for the other room.
Wow. A different time.
Right, a different time. And I established credit through Sears. I was able to get stuff that I needed for the car that I had. I was able to get credit with the local furniture store to get the 2 sets of bunk beds that I bought, the furniture that I bought. I mean, it was just, I needed to do some things that made it look nice for me because, you know, in one sense, I was kind of embarrassed to invite friends or boyfriends or other people into the house because it wasn't at the standard that I thought it should be with as many people living there as there were.
I live with someone who has a very similar thought process about where you live and what it looks like. So I totally understand it.
Right.
All right. So at this point, we are going to wrap it up. But I also want to talk about one other thing that I know that you are passionate about and have some investment in. You do a side business. What do you do now?
I have a travel agency, Priority Travel, and I've been doing Priority Travel since 2009. I also own timeshares. And with that, I sell timeshares to friends and family. Other customers. I have long-standing customers. And I can make travel arrangements from any place you want to go. Cruises, any place you want to go, group or individuals. And it's very lucrative. I use the business to also support my own travel. So my travel is paid for through what I do for my customers.
All right. So how can people find you?
Priority Travel is on Instagram and Priority Travel LLC.
You have a
My phone number,
you have a email.
MDOUGHTY 319 I can get information there, or Priority Travel.
I think iCloud, I'm assuming.
At iCloud.com.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad we had this conversation because there are a few things in there that I didn't know that I'm glad I know now. But the next time I want to talk to you, because I definitely want to bring you back, I want to get into a little bit more about your life between 1987, when greatness happened, and you know, I'm not gonna talk about the why or how, but the greatness happened, and pretty much today, and more along the lines of relationships and the ins and outs of what you guys dealt with as a couple and what you guys dealt with as parents.
Right.
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 I can't wait till we do it again. And next time we're going to bring the old guy up.
Thank you. The old guy, my husband.
Yes, yes, we're going to bring that on.
My baby, my love.
Yes. All right. So I'm glad we got to sit in this conversation corner, and great conversation, and we'll do it again soon. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.